There is a place in the United States where, in order to enter your own country, you pull over at a wooden box beside a gravel road, pick up a phone, and report yourself. 2 buttons. One calls the United States to tell them you have arrived. The other calls Canada to tell them you have left. Nobody is there. Nobody checks. You are trusted to make the call. To get to that box, you have just driven about 50 miles through Manitoba, the last 20 on remote gravel, because there is no road to this place from the country that owns it. The school bus that serves the older children here crosses the international border 8 times a day. This is not a territory. It is not a possession. It is Minnesota. This is the map, drawn by John Mitchell in 1755, and already 30 years out of date when the men who ended the American Revolution spread it across a table in Paris. On it, Lake of the Woods is a tidy oval with one obvious northwestern tip, and just to the west of that lake, Mitchell drew the source of the Mississippi River. So the 1783 Treaty of Paris said something that sounded perfectly reasonable. The border would run to the northwesternmost point of Lake of the Woods, and from there due west to the Mississippi. Here is the problem. The Mississippi does not rise west of Lake of the Woods. It rises to the south of it. A line running due west from that lake never touches the river. It never touches anything. It just goes. The 2 most powerful countries in the Atlantic world had signed a border that cannot be drawn. In 1798, the explorer David Thompson established where the Mississippi actually begins, and the gap became undeniable. There was now a hole in the map where a nation's edge was supposed to be. Everyone knows this part of the story as a mistake, a blunder, a cartographer's slip that accidentally handed America a scrap of land nobody wanted. The historian who has studied this border most closely says that is wrong. William Lass objects every time he sees the northwest angle called a surveyor's error. He has looked, and there is no error. What he finds instead is decades of exploration, survey, argument, trade-off, and compromise. The map created the problem. It did not create the angle. Something else did. In 1807, Britain came to the table with a solution, and it was an elegant one. Run the old water boundary only as far as the point where it first meets the 49th parallel, and from there, simply follow the 49th westward, clean, straight, no leftover. That proposal would have erased the northwest angle before it ever existed. The Americans said no. 11 years later, the Convention of 1818 settled it the other way. A line dropped due south from the northwesternmost point of that lake until it struck the 49th parallel, and everything left stranded above, about 120 square miles of forest and shoreline, stayed American. It kept happening. Through the boundary commissions of the 1870s, as surveyors finally went out and physically marked that point and that line, further proposals to trade the angle away were declined. Why is where the historians part company. Some read it as national pride, that you do not reopen the wording of the treaty that made you a country. Others read it more bluntly, as a young nation that simply did not give land back, and some accounts treat the whole thing as an unintended consequence that nobody ever got round to correcting. But the shape of it is not in dispute. Somebody offered to make this go away, and the United States chose to keep it. Because that is the part the map story always leaves out. A line on paper is an abstraction for exactly as long as it takes for somebody to build a house on the wrong side of it. The northwest angle is the only place in the contiguous United States north of the 49th parallel. It has a dozen or so resorts and the families who run them. It has a bar. It has a schoolhouse. The last one-room public schoolhouse in Minnesota is here. One room, several grades, one teacher. Linda Lou Me has taught in it for more than 30 years, and she commutes the way the geography demands, by snowmobile in the winter and by boat in the summer. The older children ride a bus to War Road, about 2 hours each way. To do that, the bus leaves the United States, drives through Canada, and re-enters the United States, and then does the whole thing again in reverse that afternoon. 8 border crossings every school day, and every adult driving in and out reports themselves at that wooden box, an unstaffed booth, 2 video phones, and an honor system holding up an international frontier. For most of a century, that was simply the texture of life here. Inconvenient, charming even, until it wasn't. In the 1990s, Ontario changed its fishing rules. Anglers who were not staying overnight in an Ontario lodge could no longer keep the walleye they caught in Ontario's share of Lake of the Woods. For a community whose entire economy is people who come to fish, a rule written on the other side of a border was quietly strangling the season. So in 1998, the Angles Congressman Colin Peterson introduced a bill in the United States House of Representatives to let the Northwest Angle secede from the United States and join Canada. Now, it was leverage, and he said so at the time. He called it a ploy for attention. Actually ceding American territory would have required a constitutional amendment, which was never going to happen. But it worked. The dispute went international. The United States challenged Ontario's rules as a trade violation, and in October 1999, Ontario relaxed them. The joke here is a good one, and it is worth saying plainly. The first serious proposal to remove the Northwest Angle from the United States since 1807 came from the people who live in it. On the 18th of March, 2020, the border between the United States and Canada closed to non-essential travel. Everywhere else, that was an inconvenience. Here, it severed the only road to the rest of the country. The Angle's visitors, its entire economy, worth something like $10 million a year, simply stopped being able to arrive. Resorts lost 70, 80, 90% of their business. Americans could not reach American soil. The restrictions were extended a month at a time, then another month, then another. So in January 2021, the people who run those resorts went out onto the lake and built a road. Not a trail, a road, about 30 miles of it, 22 of those plowed straight across the ice of Lake of the Woods, and the rest through the woods along a snowmobile route. They ran it over ice between 21 and 25 inches thick, and where the ice had opened into cracks too wide to drive, they built bridges over them. 20 miles an hour, 2 hours end to end, a toll to use it. Within 2 weeks, the lights were back on in the cabins, the fish houses were full, and the bar had customers again. The following winter, they did it all over again. 214 years earlier, the United States had been offered a straight line and turned it down. Now, the people living inside the consequence had been cut off from their own country, and rather than wait for 2 governments to sort it out, they went around. There is one more layer under all of this, and it is the oldest one. Long before John Mitchell drew that lake wrong, and long before anyone in Paris argued about its northwestern tip, the Anishinaabe lived on both shores of Lake of the Woods. The water was not an edge. It was the middle of somewhere. Today, land belonging to the Red Lake Nation lies inside the Northwest Angle, a nation whose territory, alone among Minnesota's reservations, was never broken up and sold off under the allotment laws and remains held in common. And directly across the lake in Ontario sits a community called Northwest Angle 33 First Nation. The same name, opposite sides of a line that neither of them drew. We tend to think of borders as conclusions, the settled outcome of some argument that finished a long time ago. The northwest angle is what happens when you can see the argument still sitting there in the landscape. A bad map, a refused offer, a phone in a wooden box, a school bus crossing a frontier 8 times a day, and a road built on ice by people who had run out of patience. None of it was inevitable. All of it is still there. Next time, we go to the deepest lake on Earth, and to the winter a country in the middle of a war laid railway tracks straight across its frozen surface and watched a locomotive go through the ice. Lake Baikal. If you want to know how a border gets drawn badly and then defended anyway, subscribe. That is most of what this channel is about.